Welcome back, everyone. Let's dive right in, shall we? Today, we're taking a look at the absolute sheer evolution of American aerial supremacy. We've got a fascinating two-part journey lined up for this explainer, tracing a line straight from the gritty, massive bomber fleets of World War II all the way to the highly elite, singular technology of the modern presidential jet. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the birth of the mighty Eighth, move into the daylight bombing gamble, and look at turning the tide. Then we'll pivot to the modern flying fortress, see Air Force One under fire, and finally wrap up with the next generation. Let's get started. Section 1. Birth of the mighty Eighth. From zero planes to the world's largest air force. Okay, let's set the scene. It's early 1942. The U.S. has just entered the war following Pearl Harbor, and to take back the hostile skies over Europe from the incredibly battle-tested German Luftwaffe, America needed to build a massive air force, basically from absolute scratch. The scale of mobilization here was just staggering. In February of 42, General Ira Eaker arrives in England to set up the 8th Air Force. His starting inventory? Exactly 0 planes and just 6 men. Literally 0 planes. But, the American war economy absolutely kicks into overdrive. By July, the first U.S. bomber crews start touching down, and incredibly, by late 1942, the 8th Air Force boasts over 300 planes and 13,000 men. It was, quite frankly, a logistical miracle. But of course, just having the planes was only half the battle. Section 2. The daylight bombing gamble. Precision versus protection in the hostile skies of Europe. Once all those forces were actually in place, the U.S. faced this huge strategic dilemma, and they completely disagreed with their British allies on how to defeat the enemy. See, the British Royal Air Force had shifted to night or area bombing, meaning they were dropping bombs under the cover of darkness. It definitely meant lower risk to their crews, but the trade-off was much lower accuracy and a really high civilian toll. Well, the U.S. flat out refused this approach. They chose daylight bombing. Their goal was high-accuracy targeting of military sites using their top-secret Norden bomb site, which was this advanced mechanical computer for aiming. But the catch? Doing this in broad daylight meant an extremely high, borderline suicidal risk to U.S. crews, who were basically sitting ducks for German fighters. To actually survive this daylight gamble, the U.S. relied heavily on a very specific weapon, the B-17 Flying Fortress. And it wasn't just a catchy, cool nickname. It was literally designed to be a flying fortress. We're talking about a heavily armed bomber packed with a 10-person crew and 12.50 caliber machine guns covering nearly every conceivable angle. The engineers insisted these planes could defend themselves against absolutely anything the enemy could throw at them. But as we're about to see, what works on the drawing board is sometimes very different from actual combat. Section 3. Turning the tide. Heavy costs, new tactics, and securing the skies for D-Day. So when the 8th Air Force actually started flying these daylight missions deep into German territory without long-range fighter escorts, it resulted in absolute chaos. Major Paul Tibbets, the pilot who led the very first B-17 daylight bombing mission over German-held territory, captured this terror perfectly. After watching a fellow plane spin out of formation on a later mission, he said, up to this time the war had seemed little more than a game. Now at least, the war was a bloody reality for all of us. You had these inexperienced pilots understandably taking evasive maneuvers whenever they were fired upon, which meant these early raids weren't even hitting their targets. Clearly, something had to change. Enter Colonel Curtis LeMay. He forced this terrifying but totally necessary tactical pivot. First, he ordered absolutely no evasive maneuvers on the final approach. Crews had to fly straight and level directly through enemy flak, that deadly anti-aircraft fire. Second, they had to stack the bombers in these incredibly tight formations. This created a wall of overlapping machine gun crossfire to fend off the fighters. It was a brutal, terrifying strategy that required immense courage, but it concentrated their firepower and actually made the bombing runs work. 26,000. Let that number really sink in for a second. That is the number of 8th Air Force airmen who died during World War II. It was a devastatingly heavy, brutal cost. But their incredible sacrifice eventually cleared the skies of the Luftwaffe, and that paved the exact way for the D-Day invasion. They quite literally secured the victory from the air. Section 4. The modern flying fortress. The apex of American aerial supremacy. So let's fast forward. We're moving from these massive armadas taking heavy casualties to a single, practically invincible jet. What actually turns a standard Boeing 747 into an impenetrable flying White House?
Well, for starters, it's an airborne global command center where the president can coordinate military action from 40,000 feet. It actually features an operating room and an onboard doctor ready for any asymmetric threat. It boasts 87 telephones. We're talking secure, encrypted lines alongside unclassified ones. The whole thing is packed with highly classified radar jamming and advanced missile defenses. And get this, for zero-fail readiness, technicians actually use fiber optic microscopes to inspect the engine blades for tiny, microscopic grains of sand. It is mind-boggling, elite technology. Section 5. Air Force One under fire. Testing the aerial bunker during national crises.
But, all of that pristine technology is completely useless if it can't perform when it really counts. The ultimate test of this aerial bunker happened on September 11th, 2001, where the pristine environment of the plane completely collided with the chaos of the real world. That morning, amid the hijackings, the plane executes this incredibly steep emergency takeoff from Florida just to avoid potential ground fire. By midday, with all commercial flights fully grounded, Air Force One is literally the only non-fighter plane left flying in U.S. skies. Finally, at 3:07 p.m., President Bush orders the plane home to Washington from Offutt Air Force Base. It was a day of just unprecedented, unbelievable tension. And to really show you how the chilling terror of the unknown transcends generations, listen to Colonel Mark Tillman, the pilot of Air Force One that day. He said, "There was an aircraft coming at us and its transponder was not on. We weren't sure who's hijacked or who wasn't." It's incredible, right? Just like the bomber crews over Europe wondering what was coming out of the clouds, the crew of Air Force One faced an unseen, terrifying threat to the commander-in-chief.
But the modern flying fortress isn't just a defensive bunker. It can also be used for elite, covert insertions right into war zones. Take the absolutely secret 2003 Thanksgiving flight to Baghdad, real cloak and dagger stuff. First, the president secretly boards in Texas, literally wearing a baseball cap pulled down to avoid detection. They fly to Andrews Air Force Base and quickly swap to an identical, fueled-up backup plane that's hidden away inside a hangar. Then, using a fake call sign to completely vanish off the radar, they descend into the Iraqi combat zone in total darkness. It was a masterful, top-secret operation.
Section 6. The Next Generation. Building the Future of Presidential Travel. Now, the current fleet has been flying for over 30 years. It's served 5 presidents. So to maintain this zero-fail level of security, a massive, forward-looking technological evolution is currently underway. The Legacy 747 is sitting on a 30-year-old airframe with aging analog cockpit instruments that the Air Force is actually struggling to find replacement parts for. Compare that to the incoming 747-8. This thing is 250 feet long, it's capable of near Mach 1 speeds, it gives the president an extra 1,000 miles of range, and it features these revolutionary carbon fiber saber wings that allow it to take off on incredibly short runways. It's truly an entire generation ahead. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought. From armadas of thousands taking heavy casualties in the flak-filled skies over Europe to a single, practically invincible jet carrying the leader of the free world, how will the flying fortress evolve next to face the unseen threats of tomorrow? Because if there's one thing we know for sure, the history of aviation never stands still. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.